Thank you, Commissioner. Now there will be time for some questions. I'll kindly ask you to tell us your name and where you come from. Yes, Mette. Helle, sorry.
Helle Christensen, Denmark, from a Danish weekly. You just mentioned, Mr. Scholz, that you achieved some agreements on the greening already by now in the Council. And Mette Gjerskov, could you please summon the achievements where you can meet on the principles of greening?
Well, I think that it's very important that the discussions now we have in Council, in Agricultural Council, about greening, is on how to do this. It's not if or when, but how to do it. But it's also important to realize that these parts of the CAP also is part of the budget. So many of the decisions will be taken when the budget is, the MFF is being decided. But I think that what we're doing right now is exploring the possibilities within greening, the possibilities of being a bit more flexible, I think, so that we can be able to have greening elements that is both appropriate for Sweden, for Spain, and from Slovenia at the same time, because you had three elements of greening in the original proposal, but what we are also discussing with both Dacian and with members of the European Parliament is to have, for example, when you are organic, you are green by definition. This could also maybe include some kind of certification system. So it's not necessarily organic, but some kind of certification. When we're talking about crop diversification, we're also talking about possibilities of being more flexible, including more different kinds of crops. Maybe we also have discussions on the size of the farms that should comply with the crop diversification. So there's a lot of discussions at the moment, but where we are trying to narrow them down, and that is what we will present in the progress report in Council here in June, the next official Council in Luxembourg.
Bonjour.
Patricia, please.
Oui, merci.
Patrice Salanzarini from France. I'd like to know whether, in your opinion, the green transition, the transition to the green economy in terms of the CAP and its ambitions already set out in the Commission's proposal, is likely to survive in the face of an inadequate budget. Let me explain this point. Should the 27 European leaders decide, the 27 governments, if they decide on a smaller budget, what then? Will there be enough money for the CAP greening part to survive? It's being said already, well, everything's going fine, but if there's not enough money, greening will be the first thing to be dropped. So what's your point of view about that? Some member states, not all of them, but some of them are, or some ministers, are already raising the question about not being on time. By the end of the Irish presidency, that an agreement won't have been reached yet on the reform. So, are we still on time? Is there enough time to negotiate to get an agreement? As I see it, the green transition has started already in the Common Agricultural Policy. This is not the first time but we've been talking about agri-environmental rules and the conditions that have to be met, cross-compliance and all that, the environmental component of rural development programs and so on. What we're trying to do is to put ecological issues at the center of the CAP alongside economic issues to make sure that growth in agriculture and development in agriculture, all agriculture, not just certain categories, is carried out in a sustainable way that will resist better over time. Now, of course, if you're talking about a public policy, a budget is key. You have to have a public policy where the market has failed to solve your problems. If we weaken the policy, well, it's not a question as to whether greening is going to survive. It's a question is, will farmers survive? Will the expectations of European taxpayers be met? We set these objectives for the common agricultural policy. The Commission has set them out in its legislative proposals. The question remains then, are they still a priority for Europe? I don't think the solution is to say, when times get tough, we just have to drop issues related to food and sustainable use of resources. You can't shut down a farm temporarily, like you might be able to shut down some kind of manufacturing factories. So you farm or you don't farm. And people who take decisions have to assume their responsibility. We've done that in the Commission. We've proposed a budget which matches what we're proposing in terms of CAP reform. Now, regards decisions to be taken on the reform and on the budget, I believe we have all the ingredients to allow us to take a decision on time. The European Commission has done everything that is needed to enable the decision to be taken on time. Everything is on the table. We're participating in this process actively. And when there are requests, as we've had from the Council on Greening, we've come forward with things which have enabled negotiations to progress. I would like to make this point. I've heard some speculation about Plan B the Commission might be preparing if the budget's not decided on. There is no Plan B regards farmers, and it's not the wish of the Commission to take an adverse decision regards farmers. It's only right and proper we should consider all possibilities, but the Commission is not preparing a Plan B for agriculture. The Commission has tabled a proposal for the budget on time and tabled a proposal for CAP reform on time. So the institutional decision-making framework in Europe is such that each player has to assume its responsibility. I'm not talking just about farmers. We're talking about the European economy as a whole here and the possibility of relaunching itself, and agriculture is just part of this.
Well, I think when we're talking about the time frame, this is co-decision, and this is first time. I didn't bring my crystal ball, but all I can say is that we've done all we can. We've done all we can to move the negotiations forward. And at the moment we are drafting a progress report, and I think that I will be very proud when I'm presenting it that we came this far in the negotiations. When it comes to green transition, you're asking, can we afford a green transition? What will we do when all the ministers of finance are coming? Will they take it away from us? I just have to say that all politicians in Europe have to be responsible in the situation we are now. We need jobs. We need growth. And we need agriculture and farmers to contribute to this. And I think that sustainability is not necessarily, it does not necessarily mean that you reduce production. No, you enhance efficiency, for example. You have less impact on nature. That is sustainability. So I think the citizens of Europe will demand from us that we create jobs, that we have farmers in Europe, and that we also can do it in a sustainable way. And that is what we're trying to show them that we are able to.
Thank you. Here at the front, please.
Karol Bujoczek from Poland. I would like to have two questions. We have heard about flexibility within greening. Does it mean that we will have the national standards, or we will have European common standards, and how could it look like? And the question from Poland, is it necessary that we in the new CAP will have to change our CAPS system to SPS system, or we still can stay by a simplified area payment system? Thank you.
I think when we're talking about flexibility in greening, we are talking about having common rules. We're still talking about having common rules that we decide together, all the countries. But the flexibility lies in the possibility of choosing between different methods, but not just for member states, also for the individual farmer. I mean, at the original proposal you already had, did you choose to become an organic farmer, then you are green by definition and you not have to meet the 3 greening elements. So the farmer can make decisions for himself, the member states can make decisions, but it will all be within the framework of what we decide among ministers, commission and parliament.
So flexibility that we proposed in greening don't mean to transfer the responsibility to member states or a menu of measures, and each one can choose a measure on another, and so to have a very big, very diverse and very disproportionate situations in the enforcement of greening. More flexibility means to take better into account in some common rules some specific situations. In terms of average of farm, in terms of capacity to implement some measures. We also propose as element of flexibility this equivalence system. So we keep the principle of 3 measures for all farmers in Europe, but we don't want to penalize champions, because in a lot of regions or member states we already have some specific agri-environmental programs, national or regional ones, with a specific certification system, who already done more than we ask on greening. So we propose to make a kind of equivalence between this system of greening and this specific local, regional, national programs, in order to avoid to ask a double or to make a double check for farmers, one for this system already existing and another one for greening. So in this manner we think this flexibility, keeping the principle at European level, covering all European agricultural area, including all European farmers, but taking into account some specific programs that can exist. Regarding SPS, so single payment system, if I well understood, so the proposal that we made in this reform is in fact to evaluate this system of single payment system, renouncing to historical reference who are based on history, to take better into account the reality and to ensure a better repartition of the budget, not only among member states, but also among farmers in a homogeneous region. So the member states will decide at which level they will define the region. Poland can decide to have a single payment in all the country, or to have 2 regions, or 3 regions, or several regions. Regions defining, taking into account agronomical criteria, or ecological criteria, or administrative criteria, or economic criteria, or to combine 7 criteria in order to take better into account the reality. So in fact, it's an evolution of the system of payment in order to have more targeted payments and more connected to the realities.
Thank you. Gaina, please.
Gaynor Morgan, UK, Wales. Two questions, really. Welsh farmers are very au fait with the fact that we have to transfer from historic to area payments, but they're very, very concerned about the timing, and they think it's too quick. 5 years is too quick. They want 10 years. The other thing is that with the crop diversification, are you saying that there'll be a ceiling on the size of farm that will have to use crop diversification, because it's a real problem for some of the smaller farmers or dairy farmers? Thank you.
I think I'll just address the question of the ceiling. No, it's not so much when we're talking about crop diversification. We're talking about not a ceiling, but a bottom, I think it's called. Because at the moment, the proposal is that 10 hectares should be a minimum for farms who should comply with the crop diversification. But there is a discussion at the moment on whether or not to raise those 10. Different numbers is on the table, but it could be both 20 and 25, whatever, different things. But the problem is that small farmers might have more difficulties to have 3 crops at the same time. So we're trying to make it more flexible when it comes to the individual crops, that you can have some crops also will count in, although they are a smaller proportion. Maybe have more different kind of crops that you can diversify between, but then also looking at this farm size to see which farms should be complying with this regulation. So you can see there's a lot of different things at stake at the moment.
Yeah, I like to add the thing that indeed the flexibility that we proposed in crop diversification take into account the size of definition of a small farm. So in the current proposal, after discussions, this size remove it from 3 hectares to 10 hectares. So it means that only farms who have more than 10 hectares have to take into account diversification. And another element of flexibility is the fact that we can take into account temporary pasture as one of the crop. So this means that for farms who have a certain area of pastures, temporary pasture including in a rotation, this pasture can be took into account as crop. So for this farm, the request is to have only 2 more crops. On the timing for the transfer to the new system, we propose to start with a certain level of redistribution in the first year, and to take all the budgetary period until 2020 into account, so to have a transition as long as the budgetary period.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Jan, please.
Yann Olivier de l'AFP. Monsieur le Commissaire, vous avez...
Commissioner, you said that there was no plan B. There'll be no adverse effect on farmers if things get behind schedule. I have the impression that some countries are not in too much of a hurry to get an agreement, and they feel it's better to have enough time to have an agreement on a good reform rather than to rushing into a reform which is not so good but which will be in place for 2014. Perhaps you could tell us more then about the problems that this might cause for farmers as of 1st of January 2014 in the absence of a reform on time. You're talking Plan B about a funeral service for a child that's just been born and is still growing. There's no sense talking about the funeral mass yet. We're still there. We've got enough food to feed this child, a child we hope will grow and assume its responsibilities. So let us not talk about somebody who's growing and developing in terms of their death and what we're going to do if they die. Now, it's obvious. You don't have to put that question to me, what's going to happen for farmers if a decision is not taken. You just go ask farmers themselves what will happen to them. if we can't guarantee direct payments to them on time in 2014. Ask those who benefit from rural development programs, agri-environmental measures in particular, but also setting up of young farmers and their training and so on. What would happen there if overnight these programs were to be cut and there were to be no continuity because the budget is not clear, or because other legal bases would have to be devised, which also require time under co-decision, whereas we already have some legal bases on the table. So it's fairly simple, really. You shouldn't get into philosophizing about what's going to happen. You basically just be cutting a policy which enables the system to work. Farmers have put together a business plan on certain assumptions about continuity. And all of a sudden, are you going to tell them, well, we haven't decided yet. We have to think another 2 or 3 years about this before we take a decision. So why don't you go off on holiday and leave your farms as they are, and we'll give you a call when we've decided on something. I think it's fairly simple.
Thank you. And the very last question goes to Eric, please.
C'est pour compléter, en fait.
Just to follow up Jan's on Patricia's questions. I'm a farmer. Don't believe you when you say that we won't have direct payments if you don't get an agreement. There are many countries who were telling us yesterday prefer to have a good agreement, even if you get beyond 2014, rather than a bad agreement. So to be frank, the common agricultural policy, would it be dead if you were not to get an agreement by 2014? No, I didn't say it's dead. I say you're running a risk of things getting blocked. The current regulation expires at the end of 2013 for direct payments, for rural development. They have to be replaced with something. But who's going to replace them? It's Council and Parliament that has to take the decision. So that would mean we'd need another proposal. We'd have to come up with some system allowing us for another decision to be taken. And you'd be taking an interim decision for what, to cover a year or 2? Farmers who know is going to be a change, how is he going to plan what he's doing for that next year or 2 if he doesn't know what's going to happen after that period, after 2 years? I'm not saying everything is dead. I'm saying that something would suddenly be stopped which had a continuity. It's not the first time, after all, that the CAP has been reformed. It's not the first time there have been changes to the CAP. It's not the first time that things have got behind schedule. But you have to give a clear prospect of a future to farmers. So that's why I'm saying I'm not thinking about a plan B, knowing that we have placed a credible plan A on the table. And that has to be decided on. Now, I understand that when the EU's budget is decided on, you have to take into account many other important and diverse factors than just agriculture. All I'm saying is that we're not yet in a situation of having to say it's too late. So I'd rather that political decision makers concentrate on how to take the decision on time rather than wasting energy thinking about plan B, whereas we've not even got to the end of a process which has been started. There will be discussions in the European Council. This summer there will be discussions in the second half of the year. So why start talking about disaster scenarios in the middle of the process? That's my point.
Well, I can only support Dacian in saying, I mean, we are in the middle of negotiations here, and they are actually moving forward. I see my colleagues in Council being very constructive in the negotiations. I see things moving forward in Parliament. We've had Paolo De Castro here telling us about the discussions in Parliament. I really think that we are moving forward. So we don't need any terrible scenarios on what might not happen and when it might not happen. Now we need to be at work. This is Europe at work, doing its job, doing the negotiations, finding solutions, finding common ground. Sometimes it can be delayed. I accept that, and maybe it will happen. But at the moment, we really are on a path of getting results. And I think that is important. I think that should be the message to our farmers and to our citizens that we are actually doing whatever we can to make progress in these discussions, because this is important, not just to the farmers, but also to our economy, to jobs, to citizens all over Europe.
Thank you, and thank you for your attention.